Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Muy buenos días a todos y bienvenidos. What a joy to be able to celebrate this Eucharist with you. I'm so grateful that you were able to come to Washington to be here. I know that a lot of people would like to have joined us, but because of the weather conditions, we're not able. We're so grateful to the seminaries, to St. John's and Redemptoris Mater for bringing their seminarians, Mother Olga, and the parishes from East Boston, and Lynn and Lawrence, and well, all of you who have joined us for this celebration. As you can see, there's a picture of Our Lady of Altagracia over the altar. Yesterday was her feast day, and in this parish, it's one of the major celebrations. Ayer fue la fiesta de Nuestra Señora de Altagracia, y aquí por 20 años yo celebraba esa misa todos los años en esta parroquia. Vamos a pedir por la intercesión de Nuestra Señora que ella nos bendiga y nos ayude en esta causa del Evangelio de la vida. During this year for mercy, we're very blessed to be listening on Sundays to St. Luke's Gospel. St. Luke's Gospel is often called the Gospel of Mercy. And at one point of the Gospel where the Pharisees criticized Jesus for welcoming sinners and eating with them, the Lord responds by giving three very powerful parables. The parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and the parable of the lost son, the prodigal son. Luke also tells us the parable of the Good Samaritan, also a parable about mercy. And it ends with Jesus saying, "Go and do likewise. Practice mercy with your neighbor." We must love our neighbor and practice mercy with those in need. The corporal works of mercy, attending to the physical needs of people, their food, their clothing, their shelter, care, and the spiritual works of mercy, attending to people's spiritual needs, forgiveness, to bear wrongs patiently, to instruct people who have doubts and questions, to comfort people in their afflictions, to admonish sinners, to pray for the living and the dead. The pro-life movement is about the works of mercy, about both the corporal and the spiritual works of mercy. It's about addressing the material and the spiritual needs of women in a difficult pregnancy so that they will give birth to their children. We save babies by saving mothers. We must never lose sight of the need to reassure expectant mothers that they are not alone, that we are there with them. Euthanasia and abortion in many ways are a result of the extreme individualism of our day. Only a restored sense of community and solidarity will provide an antidote to these great maladies. I loved the story Cardinal O'Malley talked about last night. I knew the case very well. A young Mexican girl who gave birth secretly. She was so filled with fear she couldn't tell anybody about it, but she felt that her parish would support her. She took the baby and she put it in the creche in the parish church a week before Christmas. And the baby was found and saved. We want people to know that they belong to a community that will help take care of them and take care of their babies. Pope Francis so often reminds us that there are so many wounded people out there who need our help and comfort. The year of mercy is a challenge to all of us to make our church a beacon of mercy, so that those who are suffering will see in us a good Samaritan who knows that we are neighbors, that we are brothers and sisters, members of a family that's responsible for each other. Today's parable from Luke's Gospel is also about mercy, about God's mercy and man's lack of it. The great insight of St. Therese, the little flower, in her spirituality of the little way, is that for God, it's love and humility that give value to all of our actions. Even the most insignificant actions take on great importance in God's sight when they're performed with love and humility. By the same token, great deeds that betoken selfish ambition and vainglory may win us a place in the history books, but not in God's heart. Today's parable, the parable of the Pharisee and the publican, ironically, when we hear those terms, Pharisee and publican today, we tend to think of the Pharisee as the villain, the bad guy, and the publican as the good guy. But Jesus' audience had a much different take on the situation. They would have assumed that the Pharisee was the good guy. And the fact that Jesus says that the publican, the tax collector, went home justified was a real shocker. Let's define the terms. Publican. When I was a kid, I thought the priest was talking about the Republicans. And in Fall River, they used to call the kids that went to public schools the publicans. In England and Ireland, a publican is someone who's a barkeeper, who runs a pub. But in the Gospel, the publicans were tax collectors. But not your run-of-the-mill Internal Revenue Service officer. The publicans were more like the Russian mafia. They were people with loose morals and loved money. They were hated by everyone because they were collaborators with the Roman invaders. Israel was an occupied country, conquered by the Romans. Herod was the local king, but he was just a puppet for the Roman invaders. The publicans extracted taxes from the poor people, turning part of the money over to a foreign power, the enemy, and the rest they kept for themselves. The Pharisees, on the other hand, were a group within Judaism from the time of the Maccabees. They tended to be middle-class businessmen who were very pious, who studied the law of God and taught it to the people. They were the leaders in the synagogue communities, like our parish councils. And they were the ones that really changed the emphasis of Judaism from being focused on the sacrifice of animals in the temple to being focused on the synagogues and observance of the commandments and religious laws. At the time of Jesus, there were about 6,000 Pharisees in Palestine. Unlike the Sadducees, the Pharisees believed in an afterlife and in the resurrection. The Pharisees, as we all know, often opposed Jesus and his ministry. And the Lord is often very vocal in his criticism of their hypocrisy, even calls them whited sepulchres. But so as to not fall into stereotypes, we must recall that among Jesus' early followers, there were actually two Pharisees, St. Paul and Nicodemus. And there were at least two publicans, Zacchaeus, and, who was the vertically challenged tax collector, and St. Matthew. Nevertheless, Jesus' audience would have been very shocked by this parable. To them, the Pharisee should have returned justified and blessed, and the publican should have been thrown out as a scandal and a ne'er-do-well. In the parable, even the posture of the two men is important. The Pharisee is standing in the front of the church. The publican doesn't have the courage to lift his eyes from heaven and is just beating his breast. Both prayers begin with the word God, but both prayers are very different. The Pharisee is self-congratulatory. The word I appears 5 times, and you appears once. The publican stands far off the back of the church, and he prays, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. His prayer contains a recognition of his guilt and a request for mercy so that he can receive forgiveness. Jesus highlights the reversal in this situation with the final broad brush stroke that one who goes home justified is the tax collector, the mafioso, not the Pharisee, since whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. The one who lifts up the humble and abuses the proud is God, as Mary reminds us in the Magnificat. God has scattered the proud in the conceit of their hearts. He has put down the mighty from their thrones and exalted the lowly. The Pharisee's attitude is arrogance, and the publican's attitude is humility. The attitude that Christ wants us to have is one of humility, of an awareness of our own failings and shortcomings. We're not here to judge people, but to be signs of God's love and mercy. The enemies of the pro-life movement would characterize us as judgmental and pharisaical, congratulating ourselves for our virtue and condemning others. We need to be humble messengers of God's mercy. We will save the babies by saving the mothers. Anger, indignation, condemnation will only serve to harden people's hearts in their positions. Mercy must be the watchword of the pro-life movement. Mercy for the mothers, mercy for the babies. In many ways, Project Rachel is the face of mercy in the pro-life movement. We're also grateful to Marianne McLean and many people back home in the Archdiocese who work with those whose lives have been touched by the evil of abortion. In a very interesting study that was done by Anne Steckhart, she discovered that 85% of the women who had abortions reported that they were surprised by the intensity of their emotional reaction to the abortion. These reactions included discomfort with children, feelings of low self-esteem and guilt, anger, depression, grief, the inability to communicate, feelings of suicide. And yet, 72% of the subjects reported that they did not have any identifiable religious belief at the time of the abortion. The negative reaction to abortion is not an attack of religious scrupulosity, but a human instinctual rejection of abortion. The Catholic Church has long recognized abortion's impact on women and their family, while many forces in our society try to pit the interests of the mother against the interest of her unborn child. The Church recognizes that what's best for the child is also best for the mother. Project Rachel, the post-abortion ministry, began about 15 years ago as an outreach of the Catholic Church to women and men and families who've been affected by abortion. The church is a place of healing, a field hospital, as Pope Francis says. The church speaks the truth about abortion to men and women contemplating the action. Don't do this, we say. It's wrong, and it will hurt you and the baby. But the church also speaks the full truth. If you've had an abortion, God's mercy is great enough to forgive even that. Jesus offers forgiveness and healing. He offers the hope and promise of resurrection and reunion with the child who is waiting for his parents. Our pro-life ministry is to be an instrument of God's mercy for mothers and their children. Aware of our own sins and failings, we hold out the hope of God's forgiveness and love to all, especially those painfully affected by abortion and the economical chaos that often precipitates that terrible choice. This year of mercy is a grace and an opportunity. Like the poor publican, we come to God's temple not to congratulate ourselves for our good works, but to ask for God's mercy, so that we can share that love with a broken world and allow our brothers and sisters to experience the forgiveness and the joy of our loving God, who has put us here on this planet to build a civilization of love and mercy. Thank all of you for being part of this pilgrimage of life. Let us rejoice together for the gift of life and for the gift of mercy that makes life even more beautiful.